Hey there, Chaplain Cairns here, Deputy Brigade Chaplain of the 2nd Recruiting Brigade, and I wanted to talk to you today about a kind of prayer that some of us may not have been exposed to. It's called contemplative prayer. A lot of us are normally interested in petition only, intercession, where we go into God's presence and we ask for things. And this isn't unusual. When I was growing up and I had a test, I'd appealed to God to fill in the gaps of my knowledge, and that's petition. And when we're facing crises or decision points, we often go to God to ask him to intervene in the situation. But between those crises, we ought to be spending some time in prayer in a different way. There's different kinds of prayer. There's adoration, there's thanksgiving, there's praise. If I say to my wife, thank you for doing that for me, she likes that. If I praise her in the company of other people, to those people, and I say, hey, my wife is awesome because, and then I say a few words, she likes overhearing that. But there's a kind of intimacy when I turn to her directly and I say, you are lovely to me. You are, and I fill in the blank. It's adoration, and a lot of us don't include thanksgiving, praise, or adoration in our prayer life, and we need that. Contemplative prayer is a way of taking all of your anxieties, all of your pressures, everything into the throne room of God. So some people think, well, it's a prayer time, I've got to focus on God. And so we sort of tamp down everything that we're concerned about when we try to do this contemplative prayer. But a way of doing contemplative prayer that doesn't make you leave everything outside the door, this allows you to bring everything into the throne room of God. And so what you do is you allow your anxieties, your thoughts, everything you're distracted by to sort of come up in its fullness so that you think about it. But then you use a biblical name for God, Jesus, Lord, Father. However you address God in prayer normally when you're doing petition is fine. And you use that name for God to sort of gently lay everything at his feet. So it's sort of like, some of you aren't old enough to know what a record is or a record player, but some of us grew up with that. And so the needle would start on the outside and sort of go in concentric circles and get closer and closer and closer to the end until it would just sort of scratch bump at the end. And this kind of prayer is kind of like that. You take everything with you into the throne room of God, and you cast all your cares on him one by one. And by the time you're done and you're leaving God's intentional presence with God, your intentional presence with God, you've sort of centered yourself on who God is, how he loves, how he's revealed himself, and you're kind of like, I wonder what I was worried about in the first place. So choose a name for God, and in our tradition, we like to make sure it's a biblical name for God, and that's the name you use to intentionally, as an act of your will, consciously to lay everything at his feet. You're not using that name like I usually use Lord, because it's a word that allows me to remind myself that I'm not in charge. I don't sit on the throne of my own heart even. And so I just gently say Lord, and it returns me to a focus on God from all of my anxieties. But you don't use that name for God like a bat to beat your thoughts down. That's not what we're doing. It's just to gently return to a focus on God from whatever we've thought about. And you might find that the first time you do this, you are distracted by your neighbor down the street mowing his lawn or the creaking of your chair. But that's okay. Just allow those thoughts to come up and then return to a focus on God, using that name for God, where you just sort of gently lay those thoughts at his feet one by one. I find it's very helpful to make sure that you've got a good posture. A lot of us grew up learning how to pray with our heads bowed, but you can't do a head bowed prayer for very long because your neck starts to hurt. So it's good to just have your head and your spine aligned, sitting comfortably with your feet flat on the floor in a comfortable chair. Not too comfortable or you may go to sleep, which, by the way, is fine. If you crawl up in your Father's lap and go to sleep, he loves that every bit as much as when you are playing with a toy or reading a book, just like a normal father. You know, if my kids, when they were younger, crawled up in my lap, I was delighted that they'd chosen to be with me, even if they were doing something or distracted by something. They were still present with me. And so crawl up in your Father's lap. And if the peace and rest of God falls on you when that happens, just go with it. But I also find it's helpful to focus on your breathing a bit. A lot of us under pressure and anxiety allow those anxieties to sort of constrict our breathing. And some of us under a lot of pressure and stress may not have thought about, I haven't taken a deep breath in a while. So it's good to take 10 slow, deep breaths when you're stressed out anyway. And in this kind of prayer, you can focus on your posture and your breathing a little bit so that you can pray for a longer period of time. It's good to at least start this kind of prayer with, 5 minutes of an attempt. The standard is sort of 20 minutes at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And what it does is I find between those bookends, if I do it in the morning and the evening, it allows me to go through my day in a very similar rhythm where my anger may come up. Not that there's any anger chaplains ever have. But if hypothetically my anger were to come up, instead of repressing it so that it comes out sideways at my family later, or blowing up, which could cost you your career, you allow that anger to come up. You're not repressing it and you're not responding in it, but you allow it to come up and then you subject it to the lordship of God. So I find it gives me a rhythm that helps me neither repress nor act out of emotion in ways that are toxic. So you may find this a helpful way to pray. I hope you do. If you want to hit me up and get some extra instruction on this kind of prayer, feel free to do so. This is Chaplain Cairns again, over and out.